How to Make Money Using Stoic Philosophy. Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, and Epictetus. The noise inside the machine. You know exactly what to do, and you are still broke. That sentence just hit something, did it not? Because that is the real problem, not ignorance, not lack of opportunity, not the economy, not the market, not the absence of the right connection or the right moment. You have consumed enough content to build an empire. You have watched the videos, read the books, written the plans, felt the motivation surge through you like electricity at 2 in the morning. And then, somehow, by Thursday, you are back to the same patterns, the same hesitation, the same excuse, the same result. That is not a strategy problem. That is a mind problem. And no strategy in the world can fix a broken mind. Here is what that actually looks like. You know you should invest, but fear freezes you at the moment of decision. You know your work is worth more, but you undercharge because rejection feels worse than poverty. You know you should stay focused, but comparison pulls you out of your own lane every single day, quietly convincing you that everyone else has access to something you do not. You have built a life full of financial knowledge and almost none of it has moved the needle. Why? Because the person executing that knowledge is still operating on panic, comparison, and the chronic anxiety of someone who has never learned to think clearly under pressure. And the financial industry knows this. It profits from it. Every new course, every new system, every new framework is sold to the same overwhelmed, exhausted person who already tried the last one. The promise changes. The product changes. The person does not. Because no one is addressing the actual source of the problem. They are upgrading the strategy while the mind sabotages every execution. It is like installing a high-performance engine into a car with no steering wheel. The power is there. The direction is not. Now stop for 1 second. Think about the last financial decision you made from fear. Not from reason. From fear. The investment you avoided because the timing felt wrong. The price you accepted because you were afraid they would say no to a higher one. The opportunity you watched someone else take while you were still calculating the risk. How much has that fear cost you? Not emotionally. In actual money. In actual years. In the actual distance between where you are and where you know you are capable of being. That distance is not made of bad luck. It is made of undisciplined thinking. The solution is not new. It is over 2,000 years old. It was developed by a man who governed the largest empire on earth and still felt the weight of self-doubt pressing down on him every morning. By a man born into slavery who owned nothing and built the most sovereign mind of his era. By a man so wealthy he could have spent his entire life in comfort, who instead wrote letters warning anyone who would listen that time, not money, is the only currency that actually matters. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca. They did not philosophize in comfort. They operated under pressure that would collapse most people. What they built was not a collection of beautiful quotes for wall posters. It was a precision operating system for the human mind, a system designed specifically to perform at the highest level when everything around it is designed to make it fail. That system is what this video is about. Not tips, not tactics, not a morning routine to copy, or a portfolio to replicate. A complete internal shift in the way you think about money, discipline, risk, and value. A shift that does not depend on market conditions or any external factor you cannot control. A shift that lives entirely inside you and compounds every single day you choose to apply it. But before any of that can work, you need to answer one question. One question that nobody in the financial conversation ever asks. One question so simple it sounds almost insulting. And yet the answer to it explains everything that has not worked so far. Are you ready? You are not broke. Your thinking is. What if your financial situation has nothing to do with money? That question is not rhetorical. It is the most important diagnostic tool you will encounter in this entire video, and most people never ask it because the answer is too uncomfortable to sit with. It is far easier to blame the economy, the system, the lack of connections, the timing. It is far easier to point outward than to turn the lens inward and ask, with genuine honesty, what role your own thinking has played in producing the results you are currently living with. Studies on financial behavior consistently reveal that income level alone does not determine financial stability. People who earn very little and manage it with discipline consistently outperform people who earn a great deal and manage it with emotional chaos. Lottery winners, professional athletes, entertainers who generated tens of millions of dollars have ended up financially devastated within years of their peak earnings. Not because the money disappeared on its own, because the thinking that managed it was never equipped to handle it. The money revealed the mind, and the mind was not ready. You do not have a money problem. You have a thinking problem, and until that is addressed directly, every strategy you apply will eventually be undermined by the same cognitive patterns that have been operating, largely unexamined, for most of your adult life. What are those patterns? Fear of loss that is stronger than the desire for gain, causing inaction at precisely the moments that require courage. Comparison that pulls your attention into someone else's timeline, generating anxiety that disguises itself as ambition. The sunk cost fallacy that keeps you committed to failing strategies because abandoning them feels like admitting personal failure. Confirmation bias that filters every new piece of information through what you already believe, making genuine learning nearly impossible. And beneath all of it, a chronic low-grade anxiety about the future that makes every financial decision feel heavier than it actually is. Epictetus was born into slavery. He had no money, no property, no legal rights over his own body. His master once broke his leg to demonstrate power over him. Epictetus looked up and said calmly that if he continued, the leg would break. It broke. He did not scream. He did not beg. He said, "Did I not tell you it would break?" That is not a story about pain tolerance. That is a story about a man who had located something inside himself that no external force could reach. A sovereign mind operating with complete clarity in the middle of conditions designed to destroy it. He built that sovereignty not through wealth or status, but through the relentless practice of examining his own thinking and refusing to allow undisciplined thought to go unchallenged. He understood something that took the rest of the world centuries to grasp. That poverty is first and always a condition of the mind, and that the mind, unlike circumstances, is something you can actually change. The question is not whether you have enough money right now. The question is whether the mind managing your decisions is equipped to build, keep, and multiply what you are working toward. Because if it is not, more money will simply create more of the same problem at a higher volume. Before any Stoic tool can be applied, this truth must be fully absorbed, not intellectually accepted. Fully absorbed in the way that changes behavior, not just perspective. You are not financially stuck because the world failed you. You are stuck because the thinking running your financial life has never been seriously examined or upgraded. That examination begins now. And the first tool the Stoics offer is so precise and so devastatingly practical that once you understand it, you will never be able to unsee it in every financial decision you have ever made or will ever make. The dichotomy that changes everything. Are you spending your energy on things that will never respond to it? Sit with that question before moving past it. Because if the answer is yes, and for most people it is, then a significant portion of the effort, the worry, and the emotional weight you carry every single day is being poured into a void, not because you are not working hard enough, but because the target of your energy is fundamentally incapable of being changed by you. The Stoics called this the dichotomy of control. It is the foundational principle of the entire philosophy, and it is breathtakingly simple. There are things within your control and things outside your control. Within your control, your thoughts, your judgments, your intentions, your responses, your effort, your character. Outside your control, the economy, the market, other people's decisions, external events, outcomes, and the opinions of everyone around you. The moment you confuse the two categories, you begin spending your finite energy on infinite problems, and you exhaust yourself without ever moving forward. Think about how this plays out in financial life. You spend hours obsessing over market movements you cannot influence. You lose sleep over whether a client will say yes to a proposal already submitted. You compare your progress to competitors whose internal advantages you know nothing about. And all of that energy, all of that emotional fuel, is being burned in a furnace that produces no heat for you. Meanwhile, the things you actually can control, the quality of your work, the consistency of your habits, the discipline of your daily decisions, the reliability of your character, receive whatever is left over after the anxiety has taken its share, which is often very little. Epictetus opened the Enchiridion with this exact principle. He wrote that some things are in our control and others are not. In our control are opinion, pursuit, desire, aversion, and whatever are our own actions. Not in our control are body, reputation, command, and whatever are not our own actions. The wise person makes a clean and absolute distinction between these two categories and refuses to invest emotional energy in anything that falls outside the first. This is not passivity. This is precision. The Stoic does not stop caring about results. The Stoic stops being controlled by results and redirects that energy toward the inputs that actually produce them. You cannot control whether the market goes up or down. You can control whether you study and position yourself with intelligence. You cannot control whether the client says yes. You can control whether your offer is so clear and so valuable that yes becomes the most rational response. The dichotomy is a performance tool. It removes everything from your plate that was never yours to carry and places your full capacity behind everything that actually is. Apply this principle to your financial life for a single week. Every time you feel anxiety around money, stop and ask one question. Is this within my control or outside it? If it is outside your control, release it completely, not because it does not matter, but because your energy spent there is energy stolen from what does. If it is within your control, act immediately, without waiting for perfect conditions that will never arrive. You will discover something surprising. Most of what has been exhausting you financially belongs to the second category. And the moment you stop fighting it, an enormous amount of energy becomes available for the first. But energy alone is not enough. That energy must be directed by something deeper than strategy, something the Stoics considered the only real foundation of lasting wealth. And what that foundation is will challenge almost everything the modern financial conversation has ever told you. Virtue is not a virtue. It is a strategy. What if the most profitable decision you could make today had nothing to do with money? The word virtue has been so thoroughly domesticated by self-help culture that it has almost lost its original meaning. It sounds soft, passive. But the Stoic concept of virtue, what the Greeks called arete, has nothing soft about it. It is the full expression of human excellence in action. The quality of a mind that operates with precision, integrity, and consistency regardless of what circumstances are offering or threatening. And in economic terms, it is one of the most powerful competitive advantages available to any person building anything of value. The modern marketplace is saturated with noise. Every industry is flooded with people making promises they cannot keep, cutting corners when no one is watching, optimizing for the appearance of quality rather than the substance of it. In that environment, the person who does what they say they will do, every time, without exception, without needing to be watched, stands out not as a moral exemplar, but as a rare and extraordinarily valuable professional. Trustworthiness, in a low-trust marketplace, is not a virtue. It is a premium asset. Consistency is not a personality trait. It is a compounding financial instrument. Every time you deliver exactly what you promised, you are making a deposit into a trust account that accumulates interest over time. Every client retained, every referral generated, every relationship deepened because you proved reliable where others proved convenient. These are measurable economic returns on a character investment that no competitor can replicate quickly, because character cannot be faked at scale and cannot be purchased at any price. Seneca wrote in his letters to Lucilius, letter 16, that the person who has settled their inner accounts will never be poor, regardless of what the ledger shows. The person whose word is indistinguishable from their deed, whose presence in any transaction makes the other party feel safer, has solved the trust problem that costs most businesses enormous amounts of time, energy, and money to manage. They do not need to recover from broken promises. They do not need to rebuild credibility after every failure of integrity. Their character is their brand, and their brand is their most durable asset. The person who operates with virtue in the Stoic sense develops a relationship with their own judgment that most people never access. They trust themselves, and that self-trust removes the hesitation, the second-guessing, and the paralysis that costs so many people so dearly at moments of financial opportunity. The virtuous mind is a decisive mind, and decisive minds build things. Marcus Aurelius returned to this theme throughout his meditations, because he governed an empire in which the temptation to compromise integrity for convenience was constant. He wrote repeatedly about the imperative to act justly, not because it was noble, but because it was the only foundation on which anything lasting could be built. An empire built on manipulation requires constant maintenance. An empire built on trust maintains itself. Ask yourself not what you can get away with, but what standard of quality you would be proud to have attached to your name permanently. Ask not how to appear trustworthy, but how to become the kind of person whose track record makes trust the only rational conclusion. Character compounds, integrity scales, and in a world full of people optimizing for the short game, the person playing the long game with a clean conscience and a consistent record will, over time, win by a margin that no clever tactic can match. But virtue, without the discipline to execute it daily, is nothing more than a good intention. And good intentions, as every experienced builder knows, are the raw material of regret. What Stoic discipline actually looks like in practice is what comes next. The obstacle is not in your way. It is the way. What if your greatest professional failure was the most valuable thing that ever happened to you, and you have been too busy grieving it to use it? Most people relate to failure the way they relate to injury. Something to recover from, to put behind them, to move past as quickly as possible. The goal is to get back to normal, back to the plan, back to the trajectory that failure interrupted, and that instinct, while completely understandable, is completely backwards, because failure is not an interruption to the process of building something valuable. Failure is the process. The two are not separate events. They are the same event viewed from different angles. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, Book 5, paragraph 20, that the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. This is perhaps the most practically powerful sentence in all of Stoic literature, and the most misunderstood. People read it as encouragement, as a way of saying that things will work out if you keep going. That is not what it means. It means something far more precise and demanding. The obstacle itself, in its specific form, with its specific resistance, contains the exact instruction for what must be developed to overcome it. The obstacle is the curriculum. Every client who said no is telling you something specific about your offer, your communication, or your positioning. Every business that failed is leaving behind a precise map of what not to do, and, if examined carefully, what to do instead. Every investment that went wrong is a lesson in risk assessment and emotional decision-making that no textbook could have delivered with the same permanence. The information embedded in failure is extraordinarily expensive to acquire and extraordinarily valuable to possess. The only question is whether you are extracting it or burying it. The reason most people bury it is psychological. Failure is painful, and the mind, left to its own defenses, will protect itself from pain by avoiding the examination that pain requires. It is easier to attribute failure to external causes than to sit with the discomfort of asking what you could have done differently. But external attribution is financially catastrophic, because if the cause was outside you, the solution is also outside you. And you are back to waiting for circumstances to change instead of changing yourself. The Stoic approach is the opposite. When something goes wrong, the first question is never what happened out there. It is always what happened in here. What judgment was clouded? What emotion was in charge when the decision was made? What warning was ignored because the desired outcome was too appealing? This is not self-punishment. It is forensic intelligence. Ryan Holiday drew directly from this Aurelius teaching to articulate what he called the obstacle is the way. The insight is ancient, but the application is timeless. Every great builder in history did so not despite their failures, but through them. The failures were not unfortunate detours. They were the road. Stop treating your setbacks as things to recover from, and start treating them as things to learn from. After every failure, conduct a genuine after-action review. What was within your control? What judgment failed? What would the clearest version of you have done differently? What does this failure specifically require you to develop? That practice, applied consistently, converts every loss into an asset. The lessons extracted from failure become the competitive intelligence that informs every future decision. And the person who has extracted those lessons is operating with a depth of real-world understanding that no one who has only experienced success can match. But extracting intelligence from failure requires a daily practice that most people resist, one that begins before the day starts, before the decisions are made. A practice so simple it seems almost too modest to produce the results it actually produces. And that practice is the subject of what comes next. The morning the Stoics never skipped. What would happen to your financial life if every decision you made today came from complete clarity rather than reactive noise? Not occasional clarity, the kind that is deliberately constructed every single morning before the world has a chance to install its agenda into your mind. The kind that creates a stable internal reference point from which every choice, every response, every commitment is made with full awareness of what matters and why. The Stoics practiced the morning meditation, a deliberate period of mental preparation before engaging with the demands of the day. Marcus Aurelius did not begin his mornings by checking messages or reacting to whatever urgent matter had arrived overnight. He began by writing, by thinking, by preparing himself for the specific difficulties the day was likely to present and deciding, in advance, how he would meet them, not because he could predict what would happen, but because he understood that the quality of his responses depended entirely on the quality of his mental state when those responses were required. In financial life, this practice is not about positive thinking or visualization. It is about preparation, sitting down each morning and asking a precise set of questions before the day takes over. What is the most important financial action I can take today? What obstacle is most likely to arise? And how will I respond from reason rather than emotion? What temptation am I most vulnerable to today? And what will I do when it appears? These are operational questions, not abstract ones, and the answers, committed to before the pressure begins, function as an internal GPS that keeps you oriented toward your actual priorities when the noise of the day attempts to pull you off course. The financial cost of operating without this clarity is enormous and almost entirely invisible. It shows up in the reactive emails sent before the consequences were fully considered, in the financial decision made from the anxiety of a bad morning, rather than the assessment of a clear mind, in the opportunity missed because the mental bandwidth required to recognize it had already been consumed by trivial urgency. Over years, these are not small inefficiencies. They represent an enormous cumulative drain on both financial performance and personal capacity. Epictetus taught that the person who has not defined their purpose and priorities before facing the demands of the world will be pulled in whatever direction the strongest current flows. And in the modern financial environment, the strongest currents almost never lead toward what you actually want. They lead toward what is most urgent, most stimulating, and most addictive. Without a deliberate morning practice, your financial life is being steered by the algorithm, the news cycle, and the loudest voice in the room. Not by you. What matters is not the length of the practice, but the intentionality. That there is a moment before the world begins where you are the one setting the terms, where you prepare yourself not for what you hope will happen, but for what will actually happen, because what will actually happen will include friction, disappointment, and the constant temptation to react from emotion rather than reason. That preparation is the most fundamental competitive advantage available to anyone who takes their financial life seriously, because everyone else is starting the day reactive. You will be starting it sovereign, but this sovereignty is fragile if it has not been stress tested. The Stoics had a specific practice for stress testing it, one so counterintuitive and so devastatingly effective that most people immediately look for a reason not to apply it. That practice will change the way you think about comfort forever. Comfort is costing you more than you think. What if the life you have carefully arranged to feel safe is the very thing that has been making you financially weak? This is not a comfortable question. It is not meant to be, because comfort, by design, resists examination. The more you arrange your life to avoid discomfort, the more sensitive you become to it, and the more your capacity to tolerate it quietly atrophies. That same capacity is your capacity to take risks, sustain effort, and delay gratification. And in financial terms, that atrophy is ruinously expensive. The Stoics practiced voluntary hardship. Seneca wrote about it with a directness that is almost shocking by modern standards. He would periodically choose to live for several days as if he had nothing, sleeping on a hard surface, eating the cheapest available food. Not because he was poor, he was one of the wealthiest men in Rome, but because he wanted to know with absolute certainty that poverty could not destroy him, that his capacity to function, to think clearly, to act with integrity did not depend on his comfort level, that if everything external was stripped away, something essential inside him would remain intact. This was a deliberate training of the mind's relationship with hardship, because the mind that has never experienced voluntary discomfort will go to enormous lengths to avoid involuntary discomfort, including avoiding every financial risk that carries the possibility of loss, every difficult conversation that might produce rejection, every commitment that requires sustained effort without guaranteed return. That avoidance, multiplied across thousands of small decisions over years and decades, is the architecture of a financially constrained life. Think about what delayed gratification actually requires. The ability to experience want without immediately satisfying it, to feel discomfort and not react to it, to hold tension between where you are and where you want to be without collapsing that tension through impulsive spending or the purchase of a feeling of progress that costs real money and produces no real result. That ability is not a personality trait. It is a trainable capacity. And like every trainable capacity, it atrophies without use and strengthens with deliberate practice. Epictetus taught that the person who cannot endure hardship cannot be trusted with opportunity. Opportunity, real opportunity, always comes packaged with uncertainty, effort, and the real possibility of loss. The person trained to avoid discomfort at all costs will either not recognize it because it does not feel safe, or will abandon it the moment the discomfort becomes real. The capacity to endure is not separate from the capacity to succeed. It is a prerequisite for it. The modern financial environment makes this worse. Every friction has been engineered away. Every desire can be satisfied within seconds. Every uncomfortable emotion can be numbed with a screen or a purchase. The infrastructure of modern life is specifically designed to make discomfort feel optional. And in that environment, the person who chooses discomfort deliberately is developing a capacity that is increasingly rare and increasingly valuable. You do not need to sleep on a hard floor, but you do need to regularly choose the harder path when the easier one is available. Take the cold shower, finish the project before checking the phone, make the difficult call you have been avoiding. These are reps in the gym of the mind. And the mind that trains this way builds tolerance for the specific discomforts that financial growth requires: risk, rejection, uncertainty, sustained effort, and the long wait between planting and harvest. The Stoics did not practice voluntary hardship to become numb. They practiced it to become free from the tyranny of needing comfort in order to function. And the specific tool they used to convert that freedom into urgency, into the relentless forward motion that builds something lasting, is one of the most powerful and most avoided concepts in the entire Stoic tradition. Memento Mori, the productivity tool no one wants to use. If you knew with certainty that you had exactly 5 years left, what would you stop doing today? Not what would you start doing. What would you stop? What meetings would you cancel? What projects would you abandon? What distractions would you delete? What commitments made from obligation rather than genuine purpose would you release immediately? And then, after you have cleared all of that away, what would remain? What is actually worth your time when time is revealed as genuinely finite rather than abstractly limited? That clarity is available to you right now, not as a thought experiment, but as a lived practice. The Stoics called it Memento Mori. Remember that you will die. not as a morbid fixation, not as an invitation to despair, but as the most precise focusing tool available to the human mind, because the awareness of death, genuinely absorbed and regularly applied, removes the illusion that there will always be more time to do the important thing later. Later is the most expensive word in the financial vocabulary. Later is where good intentions go to die, the address of every project that mattered, every risk worth taking, every skill worth developing that never happened because the urgency required to begin it was always slightly less than the comfort of not beginning it. And the reason later is so seductive is precisely because most people do not genuinely believe, at an operational level, that time is running out. Seneca confronted this with ferocity. And on the shortness of life, he wrote that it is not that we have little time, but that we waste so much of it. He made an argument that strikes harder with every passing year, that the person who lives without awareness of their mortality is not living a long life but a series of wasted moments strung together into the appearance of one. The financial implication is direct and unmerciful. Every hour spent on low-value activity is not a neutral choice. It is a financial decision and a negative one. Every day of procrastination on the business you want to build, the skill you want to develop, the investment you want to make, is a day of compounding that did not happen. The person who starts 5 years earlier does not arrive 5 years ahead. They arrive at a completely different destination, because the compounding that occurred in those 5 years has changed the trajectory, not just the position. Marcus Aurelius returned to Memento Mori throughout his meditations, because he was governing an empire and could not afford to waste a single day on what was not essential. He wrote in Book 2, paragraph 11, about how brief and fleeting everything is, how the past is gone, the future uncertain, and the present the only ground on which anything real can be done. He used the awareness of his own mortality not to grieve the time already spent, but to sharpen the use of the time remaining. The practice is simple. Once a day, preferably before the noise begins, spend 2 minutes with the direct awareness that this day will not return, that the hours ahead are finite and real, that every hour not directed toward what matters is an hour permanently spent on something else, not to generate anxiety, to generate clarity, the kind that makes the phone less interesting than the work, that makes the difficult conversation less avoidable than the relationship it is costing you. Urgency without panic. That is the state Memento Mori is designed to produce. The person who acts every day as though time matters, who brings the focused attention of genuine finitude to their decisions, is compounding in a way that cannot be replicated by any strategy built on the assumption that there is plenty of time left. There is not plenty of time left. There is today, and today requires a quality of decision-making that most people never access because they have never built the tool that makes it possible. That tool is a specific internal architecture for making decisions, and it is the most practically powerful thing the Stoics ever developed for use in real-world conditions. The pause that builds wealth. What if the most profitable skill in the world is not technical, not strategic, not even creative, but simply the ability to stop before you react? That sentence sounds almost insultingly simple, and yet trace back the most costly financial decisions most people have ever made. And you will find at the origin of almost everyone, a moment where the space between stimulus and response collapsed entirely, where a feeling, fear, excitement, anger, desperation, moved directly into action without a single second of rational examination. The investment made in a panic. The partnership agreed to under the pressure of scarcity. The negotiation abandoned because rejection felt unbearable. The business decision reversed overnight because of a single negative comment from someone whose opinion should have carried almost no weight. None of those decisions were made by stupid people. They were made by intelligent people whose intelligence was temporarily offline, because emotion had taken the controls. And emotion, left unchecked, is in financial terms a catastrophically expensive operating condition. The Stoics called the reactive impulse the first movement, the automatic emotional response that arises before reason has a chance to engage. They were clear that the first movement itself is not the problem. The problem is acting on it without examination. The feeling of panic when a market drops is not a failure of character. It is a neurological event. What happens next is a choice, and that choice is where the entire financial outcome is determined. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, Book 6, paragraph 13, that you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. That power is the specific, trainable capacity to insert a pause between what you feel and what you do, to create a moment of rational examination before the emotional impulse becomes an action. And in that pause, reason has the chance to ask a single question. Is this response aligned with my actual goals, or is it a reaction to a feeling that will pass? That question, asked consistently, changes everything. The Stoics were not emotionless. Marcus Aurelius felt grief, frustration, and fear. Seneca wrote about his own anxiety with startling honesty. What they developed was not the absence of emotion, but the practice of not being governed by it. The emotion arises, the pause engages, reason evaluates. Then the response is chosen, not produced automatically by whatever the nervous system is feeling at that moment. In practical financial terms, this pause is the difference between selling in a panic and holding with intention, between accepting a bad deal because waiting felt intolerable and walking away with the clarity that a better option exists, between investing because the fear of missing out was overwhelming and investing because the fundamentals, examined without emotional noise, actually supported the decision. The pause does not guarantee the right outcome, but it dramatically increases the probability that the decision was made by the part of you capable of making good decisions. When you feel a strong financial impulse, stop for 60 seconds before acting. Write down what you are feeling and what you are about to do. Ask whether this action, examined in the light of your actual long-term goals, is the one you would choose from complete clarity. In most cases, 60 seconds is enough to reveal whether the impulse was rational or reactive. That revelation, applied consistently over time, is worth an extraordinary amount of money. But reasoning clearly in private is one thing. The real test of the Stoic pause is in conditions of collective panic, when the environment itself is designed to override your rational judgment and pull you into the emotional current that everyone around you is swimming in. That specific test and the Stoic tool designed to meet it is what the next chapter reveals. When the market panics, the Stoic profits. What if every financial crisis in history was also, simultaneously, the largest transfer of wealth to those who kept their reason while everyone around them lost theirs? This is not a provocative exaggeration. It is a documented pattern. The 2008 financial crisis destroyed trillions in wealth for those who panicked and created extraordinary wealth for those who held their rational judgment intact. The crash of 2020 was the fastest market decline in history, and for those who maintained clarity, one of the fastest opportunities for growth ever recorded. The pattern repeats across every market cycle, every industry disruption, every period of economic chaos. The crisis itself does not determine who loses and who gains. The emotional response to the crisis does. The environment of a financial crisis is specifically designed by the collective panic of millions of people acting on fear simultaneously to make rational judgment as difficult as possible. The news is catastrophic. The social environment is saturated with urgency and dread. Every signal in the information ecosystem points in the same direction. This is the end. Get out. Protect yourself. The rules have changed. And in that environment, the person without a deeply established internal anchor will be swept along with the current, making decisions that feel necessary in the moment and look catastrophic in hindsight. The Stoics developed a specific meditation for exactly this kind of situation. They called it the view from above. The practice involves deliberately expanding your perspective to encompass a much larger frame of time and space than the crisis currently occupying your attention. Imagine looking down at the situation from a height of 10,000 feet, then from the vantage point of a decade, then from the perspective of history. From those distances, what looks like an emergency at ground level reveals itself as a moment in a much longer pattern. Crises have always come. Markets have always recovered. Industries have always disrupted and reformed. The person who panicked at every turn consistently underperformed the person who held their perspective across the entire arc. Marcus Aurelius used this practice to govern through plague, war, and economic disruption. He returned to the perspective of time and scale, whenever the immediate pressure threatened to narrow his judgment to the point of emotional reaction. He asked himself regularly how the decision he was about to make would look from the vantage point of a century. That question did not make the immediate pressure disappear. It made it proportionate, and proportionate pressure can be managed with reason. Disproportionate pressure is managed only by panic. In conditions of collective panic, asset prices are determined not by fundamental value, but by collective fear, which means the person who has separated their assessment of value from their assessment of emotional climate has access to information that the panicking crowd does not. They can see that the asset being sold at a fraction of its value is being sold not because it is worth less, but because the seller is experiencing an emotional state that has temporarily overridden their capacity for rational valuation. That gap between emotional price and rational value is the opportunity, and it is only visible to the person who has not joined the panic. Warren Buffett's famous instruction to be fearful when others are greedy, and greedy when others are fearful is not a clever slogan. It is a direct application of Stoic philosophy to market behavior. It requires exactly what the Stoics trained for, the capacity to maintain rational judgment in conditions specifically designed to overwhelm it. Begin applying the view from above now, before the next crisis arrives. When financial anxiety rises, deliberately zoom out. Ask what this situation looks like from 1 year away, from 5 years away. Ask whether the urgency you are feeling is a response to reality or a response to the emotional climate generated by everyone else's response to reality. That distinction, maintained consistently, is worth more than any market timing strategy ever devised. But seeing clearly when others panic requires one additional capacity: the ability to use whatever outcome follows, including the losses, as intelligence rather than as evidence of failure. The Stoics had a name for that capacity, and it is the most counterintuitive concept in this entire video. Amor Fati. How to profit from everything that goes wrong. What if the worst thing that ever happened to your financial life was also, in ways you have not yet fully understood, the exact thing that made everything that came after it possible? Amor Fati. Love of fate, not acceptance, which implies resignation, not tolerance, which implies endurance. Love, the active, willing embrace of everything that happens, including and especially the things that hurt, as the precise material from which the best version of your financial life must be built. This is the most radical concept in Stoic philosophy, and the one that, when genuinely applied, produces the most dramatic shift in financial behavior. The default human response to negative outcomes is resistance, and resistance to what has already happened is one of the most expensive emotional habits a person can maintain. Think about what it costs in real terms: the mental bandwidth consumed by replaying the failed investment, the motivational paralysis that follows a significant failure, the period where the risk of trying again feels greater than the certainty of staying still. The strategic rigidity that develops when someone burned by a bad decision eliminates entire categories of action from their available repertoire. These are the compound interest of resistance, paid over months and years, on a debt that was never necessary. The Stoic practice of Amor Fati begins with a single shift in framing. Instead of asking what went wrong, ask what this outcome is telling you that success could not have. Instead of treating the loss as a deviation from the path, treat it as the path. Instead of asking how to recover from this, ask what this has revealed that you could not have seen any other way. Marcus Aurelius built his entire philosophy of governance on this principle. He inherited an empire facing plague, war on multiple fronts, and economic stress. From the perspective of Amor Fati, each condition was a specific demand for a specific quality his character needed to develop. The plague demanded patience and long-term thinking. The wars demanded courage and strategic clarity. The economic stress demanded creative resource management. He did not love the plague. He loved what the plague required him to become. The entrepreneur who failed a business and extracted its lessons completely is entering their next venture with a depth of operational intelligence that no successful first-time founder possesses. The investor who lost significantly on a bad position and understood exactly why is making future allocation decisions with a precision that only loss can teach. The professional passed over for the opportunity they wanted, who used that experience to understand exactly what they needed to develop, is now building precisely what the market requires of them. This is not optimism. Optimism says things will get better. Amor Fati says things are already working, even when they hurt, and your job is to understand how. That shift from victim of outcomes to student of outcomes separates the person who compounds from the person who cycles through the same expensive patterns indefinitely. But extracting value from everything that goes wrong requires a specific quality of self-awareness that most people find deeply uncomfortable to practice. It requires the willingness to look at your own ego honestly, and the ego, as the next chapter reveals, may be the single most expensive overhead item in your entire financial operation. The ego is the most expensive overhead. How much has it cost you, in real and actual money, to be right? Not the times you were right, the times you needed to be right. The investment position held too long because admitting the loss felt like admitting personal failure. The partnership refused because accepting help felt like acknowledging inadequacy. The pricing kept artificially low because charging what your work was actually worth felt presumptuous. The feedback dismissed because the person offering it did not deliver it the way your ego required. Each of those moments had a financial cost, and the ego that produced them has been running in the background of every financial decision you have ever made, often without your awareness. The ego, in the Stoic framework, is not the healthy sense of self-worth that enables confident action. It is the fragile defensive construct that requires constant external validation to maintain its stability. More concerned with appearing capable than becoming capable. More invested in protecting the image of a good decision-maker than in actually making good decisions. More interested in winning the argument than in discovering what is true. In financial terms, that orientation systematically prioritizes the emotional protection of the self-image over the rational evaluation of reality. Here is what ego-driven financial behavior actually looks like. The founder who cannot hire people better than themselves because it threatens their sense of indispensability. The investor who will not cut a losing position because doing so would require acknowledging the original thesis was wrong. The professional who cannot ask for mentorship because needing support feels like weakness. The entrepreneur who targets the wrong market because they fell in love with their own idea before testing whether the market shared that love. These are not rare pathologies. They are the predictable outputs of an ego that has never been examined. Seneca wrote in his letters to Lucilius, letter 87, that the wise man wants for nothing but needs nothing more urgently than a check on his own desires. The ego is a desire dressed as an identity. It wants recognition and superiority, and it will pay for those experiences with financial and strategic decisions that would make no rational sense if examined without the distortion of self-protection. The Stoic antidote to ego is clear-eyed self-assessment. The capacity to look at your own decisions, your own performance, your own gaps, with the same dispassionate accuracy you would apply to analyzing someone else's situation. To ask not how you can justify what you have already done, but whether what you are about to do is actually the best available action, regardless of what admitting that requires of your self-image. Practically, this means developing the capacity to be wrong quickly and correctly, to change your position the moment the evidence changes, without the delay introduced by the need to save face, to invite the most challenging criticism available and treat it as a gift rather than an attack, to seek out people who are better than you in the areas that matter and learn from them, without the defensiveness that makes learning impossible. The financial rewards of ego dissolution are enormous. The person who can change course without emotional resistance adapts to market conditions faster. The person who can admit error cleanly recovers from losses faster. The person who can accept help without shame builds leverage that the isolated ego can never access. The business that can hear what customers are actually saying builds what the market actually needs. Releasing the ego does not make you less ambitious. It makes your ambition clean. Unburdened by the constant overhead of protecting an image, your energy becomes available for what actually matters. But even the most ego-free ambition will be undermined if it is not directed with the right relationship to time. And Seneca's warning about time is the subject of the next chapter. Time is Seneca's only currency. What would your financial life look like if you treated every hour with the same protective fierceness you bring to every dollar? Most people would say they value their time. Most people behave as though they have an unlimited supply of it. The contradiction is so normalized it has become invisible. You would not hand a stranger a significant amount of money without knowing what it was for. But you will give hours, days, entire years to activities and commitments that produce nothing of value, without the slightest hesitation, because time does not feel as finite as money does, even though it is infinitely more so. Seneca was one of the wealthiest men in Rome. He spent his later years writing, with the urgency of someone who had genuinely understood what was at stake, about the catastrophic mismanagement of time he observed in everyone around him, and, with brutal honesty, in himself. On the Shortness of Life, he wrote that people are tight-fisted with property and money, yet as soon as it comes to squandering time, they are most wasteful of the one thing in which it is right to be stingy. The financial implications are not metaphorical, they are arithmetic. Every skill you are not developing is a future earning capacity not growing. Every high-value project you are delaying is a compounding return that is not started. Every relationship you are not deepening is a network effect, not accumulating. Every hour spent on low-value consumption or reactive distraction is an hour permanently subtracted from the finite total available for building what actually matters to you. There is no overtime. The lost hours are simply gone. Seneca distinguished between time that is truly lived and time that is merely past. Time truly lived is spent in full alignment with your most important purposes, in work that develops you, in relationships that matter, in the deliberate practice of what you are actually here to build. Time merely past is time that happens to you without your genuine participation. The busy day that left you exhausted but produced nothing of lasting value. The years spent in a career that never truly engaged your best capacities because changing it felt too risky. The urgency Seneca intended is not anxiety. It is clarity. The clarity that comes from genuinely accepting that the hours ahead are real, finite, and entirely within your power to direct. That the choice of how to spend the next hour is a financial decision, a character decision, and a legacy decision simultaneously. Practically, this means becoming genuinely protective of your time in ways that most people find socially uncomfortable. Saying no to commitments that do not align with your actual priorities, even when saying no is awkward. Treating your most productive hours as non-negotiable appointments with your most important work, not as time available to whoever makes a sufficiently urgent request. Regularly auditing how your hours are actually being spent, not how you intend to spend them, and making corrections with the same seriousness you would bring to a financial audit that revealed unexpected losses. But time management divorced from the capacity to withstand pressure is fragile. The person who manages their time beautifully in normal conditions and collapses into reactive chaos when things go wrong has not yet built the most important thing. The inner structure that the Stoics considered the only truly unbreakable asset any person can possess. The inner citadel, your only unbreakable asset. What is the one thing that no market crash, no failed business, no catastrophic loss, and no external disaster can ever actually take from you? Not your savings. Those can be wiped out. Not your reputation. That can be damaged. Not your network, your skills, or your track record. All of those are real and valuable, but all of them are external, which means all of them are, in principle, vulnerable. The one thing that cannot be taken, the one asset that survives every conceivable external catastrophe, is the quality and sovereignty of your own mind. The Stoics called it the inner citadel, and they were not using the term poetically. They meant it with the same precision an architect uses when designing a structure intended to withstand anything. Marcus Aurelius developed this concept not as an abstract philosophical ideal, but as a survival tool. He faced the Antonine Plague, which killed millions and devastated the economic and military capacity of Rome. He faced wars on multiple fronts simultaneously. He faced betrayal by people he trusted. He faced the deaths of several of his children. And through all of it, he governed with clarity, justice, and remarkable emotional stability. Not because he did not feel the weight of what was happening, but because he had built something inside himself that the weight could not collapse. The inner citadel is not emotional numbness. It is the unconquerable core of the rational self, the part that observes, evaluates, and chooses even when everything around it is in chaos. It is built through the daily practice of all the disciplines described in this video: the morning preparation, the deliberate discomfort, the cultivation of virtue, the examination of ego, the practice of the rational pause. Each of these, applied consistently over time, builds a layer of the citadel. And when the citadel is strong enough, no external event can produce internal collapse. In financial terms, this is what most people call resilience but rarely actually possess. The person with a strong inner citadel does not require external stability in order to function at their best. They can lose a business and begin rebuilding within days, not years, because the identity worth protecting was never tied to the business. They can experience a significant financial loss and maintain the clarity to analyze what happened, extract the lesson, and make the next decision from reason rather than from the trauma of the loss. They can work through extended periods of uncertainty because the internal reference point of their own character and purpose does not depend on external confirmation. This is the quality that differentiates the person who builds something lasting from the person who builds and loses and never quite understands why. The citadel is what remains when everything else is stripped away, and the person who has built it knows, at a level deeper than intellectual understanding, that they are not their circumstances. They are not their results. They are the quality of mind that produced all of those things, and that quality can produce them again, regardless of what the external environment has done with the previous version. Building the inner citadel requires nothing more than the consistent application of what you have been learning throughout this video. Every morning practice reinforces it. Every moment of voluntary discomfort strengthens it. Every rational pause adds another layer. Every instance of choosing virtue over convenience, of releasing the ego in favor of truth, of treating time as the irreplaceable resource it actually is, these are not separate habits. They are the same practice, approached from different angles, all building the same structure. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, Book 8, paragraph 48, that nowhere can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul. Not in wealth, not in security, not in the absence of problems, in his own soul. That retreat is available to you. It is not waiting for better circumstances. It is built through the choices you make in the circumstances you already have. But the citadel, however strong, can be undermined from within by a force the Stoics identified as the most insidious source of lifelong financial self-destruction. Not external pressure, not market forces. Something far closer and far more personal than any of those. Are you chasing the wrong things? What if everything you have been working this hard toward is quietly making you less free? This is the question that the financial conversation almost never asks, because the financial conversation assumes that more is better. More income, more assets, more options, more security, more status. The entire machinery of financial motivation runs on the premise that you want more of something, and that wanting more will drive the behaviors required to get it. And that premise is almost never examined. Epictetus examined it relentlessly. In his Discourses, Book 1, Chapter 1, he wrote that wealth consists not in having great possessions but in having few wants. That sentence, taken seriously rather than casually appreciated, is one of the most financially subversive ideas in human history. It suggests that the starting point of financial freedom is not the acquisition of enough, but the examination of desire itself. The person who has calibrated their desires to what is actually aligned with their reason and values has already solved the fundamental problem that most people spend entire lifetimes trying to solve with income. What does misdirected desire look like in practice? The business built to impress people whose approval was never genuinely wanted. The income target absorbed from an environment rather than chosen consciously. The asset acquired to signal a status that was never personally valued. The relentless expansion pursued not because it genuinely serves the life you want to live, but because stopping feels like losing. The career path followed because it was presented as the responsible choice by people whose definition of responsibility was never interrogated. Misdirected desire is expensive in the obvious sense that it drives the acquisition of things that cost money without adding genuine value to the life actually being lived. But it is even more expensive in the sense that it directs your focused attention and sustained effort toward targets that will not produce satisfaction when reached. And the person who reaches a goal and finds it empty does not typically conclude that the goal was wrong. They typically conclude that they need a bigger goal. And so the cycle continues, at increasing cost and decreasing return, until something forces the examination that should have happened at the beginning. The Stoic practice for addressing this is called the discipline of desire. It begins with a single honest question. Do I actually want this, or do I want what I believe this will make people think of me? The answer, when pursued honestly, is often surprising. Many of the financial ambitions people carry most urgently turn out, under examination, to be someone else's definition of success accepted without scrutiny. And many of the things that are genuinely wanted, the freedom to work on meaningful problems, the security to take creative risks, the time to be fully present in relationships that matter, require far less financial accumulation than the unexamined desire structure assumed. This is not an argument for wanting less. It is an argument for wanting correctly. The person who wants with genuine clarity, who has examined their desires and retained the ones that actually align with their reasoned values, is a far more effective builder than the person driven by undifferentiated hunger. Their energy is not divided among dozens of partially desired targets. It is concentrated behind a small number of things that are genuinely, deeply, and rationally wanted. And concentrated energy, sustained over time, is the mechanism by which everything significant gets built. Calibrating desire requires courage. The courage to admit that some of what you have been working toward was never truly yours. The courage to stop measuring your progress against the wrong ruler. The courage to define success on terms that are internally generated rather than externally assigned. That courage, once found, does not make you less ambitious. It makes your ambition clean, focused, and sustainable in a way that undifferentiated hunger never can be. But even the most clearly calibrated desire will remain unrealized without the willingness to take risk. And the Stoic relationship with risk is the one aspect of this philosophy that most closely mirrors what the best investors, entrepreneurs, and builders of lasting value have always intuitively understood, even when they could not articulate why. The only investment that never loses value. After everything, after all the philosophy, the discipline, the tools, and the practice, what is the one investment worth making that no market can price, no crisis can erase, and no external force can ever take away? Not a portfolio, not a business, not a skill set, though skill sets compound magnificently, not a network, though relationships are among the most valuable assets any person can build. All of those are real. All of those are worth building. But all of them are external. All of them are subject to some degree to conditions outside your control. The one investment that falls entirely within your control, unconditionally, is the investment in your own character, in the quality of the mind that makes every other decision, in the person you are becoming through the daily application of everything this video has explored. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, Book 2, paragraph 14, that a man's life is a mere moment, his existence a flux, his perception clouded, his body's composition corruptible. But his reason, if sovereign, is the one thing that time cannot dissolve. That sentence contains the entire financial philosophy of Stoicism in compressed form. The external things are temporary. The internal thing, the sovereign reason, the disciplined mind, the character built through consistent practice, is the one thing that compounds without limit and survives without exception. This is not abstract comfort. It is a precise economic argument. The person who has built genuine character, who is known for their integrity, their reliability, their clarity of judgment, and their capacity to function well under pressure, will always be able to generate value in any market, in any economy, in any industry, through any disruption. Because what they are offering is not a product that can be commoditized or a service that can be automated. It is the quality of a mind built with intention over years of disciplined practice, and that quality, in a world of increasing complexity and uncertainty, is one of the rarest and most valuable things that exists. The Stoic concept of legacy is not about monuments, not about having your name attached to a building or a social media following. It is about the quality of character imprinted on every decision you made, every person you worked with, every problem you engaged with honestly and intelligently over the course of a life fully and deliberately lived. It is about the standard of thinking you brought to every interaction, the consistency between your stated values and your actual behavior, the depth of contribution you made to every context you occupied. That is the thing that outlasts you. That is the compound interest that keeps paying after the account holder is gone. Every chapter of this video has been building toward this. The dichotomy of control teaches you to direct your energy exclusively toward what you can actually change, and you are always the first and most important thing you can change. The practice of virtue teaches you that the most durable competitive advantage is character, built through daily choices, not grand gestures. The embrace of obstacles teaches you to extract intelligence from every outcome, building wisdom that no one can purchase and no crisis can destroy. The discipline of desire teaches you to want the right things with the right intensity, so that your effort is aligned with what actually produces the life you are genuinely trying to build. You did not come here to learn how to chase money. Something in you already knows that the way you think is the way you live, that the quality of your inner life, the clarity, the discipline, the integrity, the sovereign reason that Aurelius called the one thing time cannot dissolve, is not separate from your financial life. It is the foundation of it. The strategies, the systems, the tactics, all of the external machinery of financial success will work for the person who has built this foundation, and they will fail repeatedly and expensively for the person who has not. The philosophy is not the answer. You, applying it every single day without waiting for perfect conditions, without requiring external validation, without allowing the noise of comparison or the comfort of delay to interrupt the work, you are the answer. The Stoics knew this 2,000 years ago. They wrote it in private journals, in letters to friends, in teachings delivered to students who had nothing but were learning to build everything from the inside out. And the message has not changed. Build the mind. The rest follows. Not as a promise that circumstances will cooperate, as a guarantee that you will be capable of building what you need, regardless of whether they do. That is the only investment that never loses value. That is the only legacy worth leaving. And it begins not tomorrow, not when conditions improve, not when you have more time or more resources or more certainty. It begins in the next decision you make, and the one after that, and the one after that. For as long as you choose to make it,